Finally, the plane took off. Kathy, I don't know how this always happens. She ended up with the middle seat. Don't know how that happens. I booked the ticket, so it's really sad that she got the middle seat.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
Well, welcome everybody, and I trust you're all well and hunkered down at home. I mean, at this point, pretty much the whole world has been shut down, at least Canada and our city. And of course, that means something different for everybody. Anyway, we've just decided we're going to make the best of it. So tonight, I'm hosting a huge quarantine party, and you're all invited. Shame none of you can come. And I guess we're about 3 or 4 weeks away from knowing what everybody's true hair color is now that the salons are all shut down. Well, what we're doing today is we're going to carry on this series that began a few weeks ago called For Such a Time as This. And one of the things I've been sharing with you is this really important concept that comes from Leviticus chapter 18. And it tells us if we behave badly towards the planet and the animals, towards one another, towards the poor, if we behave badly sexually and begin to act in sexual immorality, then the land itself will actually react against us and will actually vomit us out. It's almost like the land has this way to be personified. God personifies the earth and it gets sick and it vomits us out. So we're going to be looking at the story of Deuteronomy chapter 8 and chapter 9. And here's the context of this. Deuteronomy is the second reading of the law. They got the reading of the law in Leviticus, and then there was the second reading in Deuteronomy. And what it was to prepare the people to go into the promised land. He wanted to make sure they were ready. And this is what he told them about the promised land. He said, I'm not giving you this land because of your righteousness. I'm giving you this land because of the wickedness of the people who are there now, and I am driving them out. I hope you're not missing that. The people before him, or before them rather, the Canaanites were being vomited out of the land because of their wickedness, because of the very things I've been talking about this. And so he's telling them, he says, I'm going to send you in there, not because you're so great, but because the last people are getting vomited or driven out. And so what he does is he promises them this land flowing with milk and honey and wheat and barley and fresh water and mountains and rivers and valleys. And he tells them that there's vines and there's pomegranates and there's fig trees. And it's this glorious place. And this is what he says to them. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 8. I'm going to start at verse 10. Listen carefully. It says, when you have eaten and are full, and then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and his statutes, which I command you this day, lest when you have eaten and are full, and you have built beautiful homes and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold are multiplied, and that all that you have is multiplied, when your heart is lifted up and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. Verse 17, then you say in your heart, my power and my might of my hand has gained me this wealth, and you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. I'm hoping you caught that. He wants to give us prosperity. He wants to bless us with all of these things. He wants to give us all the goodness of the land, but he doesn't want us to forget where it came from. Now, I have a question for you. If there was a promised land in our world today, where would it be? And I'll tell you where it would be. It'd be right where we're living. If there was anywhere in the world that was a promised land, we're living in it. But here's my question. Which one of us can take any credit for it? And there's all kinds of politicians that take credit for it, and they talk about the prosperity we have, and they say basically what it said here, that my power and my might has gained me this wealth. And the Lord responds to that. He reacts to that. And he says, you will forget that it's the Lord your God who gives you the power to get wealth. And when we look at the land today, none of us are really responsible for this. I'm not responsible for any of it. I was born here. Even if you were an immigrant, you're not responsible for it. You won the lottery and were able to immigrate to this place. So none of us can take credit for it. And you know, our ancestors, they knew this. The founding fathers of Canada knew this. It was Sir Leonard Tilley. He was one of the founding fathers. And when they were trying to name Canada, they were gathered together over 100 years ago. And he said this, Leonard Tilley said this. He said, why don't we call it the Dominion of Canada? And he said, for it says in Psalm 75 that he shall have dominion even from sea to sea. And so on top of the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, it is written, he shall have dominion from sea to sea, Psalm 75. That was how our nation was established as a Christian nation, because they understood that God had given us this land. We have forgotten that it's the Lord our God that gives us this wealth. All you have to do is look at what happens in Canada when it comes to church. 2/3 of Canadians never, ever set foot in a church. Well, maybe for a wedding or a funeral or whatever. But they, for the most part, are never part of the church. And then the 1/3 that does go to church, they barely go to church. They've done the numbers on it. The average churchgoer goes 1.3 times a month. Or a simpler way to put that is, the average church attender goes to church once every 3 weeks. And so when we look at what's going on in our nation, we realize that we are really at risk of suffering the same fate as Israel, because Israel got vomited out again and again and again. Go read their history. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous how many times. And God brought them back again and again, and they behaved badly, and they got vomited out again. So every generation has what I'm calling, I didn't invent the term, but a defining moment. And we all know what a defining moment is. It's a turning point. In sports, it's that moment which the whole game pivots. And when you talk about that game, you talk about, that play or that touchdown and how the whole game pivoted on that, and the winners became the winners because of that defining moment. During wartime, we know what these defining moments are. There's when the tide turns in favor of one side. And the example from the Second World War would be Normandy, the beaches of Normandy, D-Day. It was the defining moment. And every generation has one. And we are living in our defining moment right now. Decades from now, we're going to be talking with our kids and our grandkids about this moment. And I know there's all kinds of people saying, we just want it to get back to the way it was. I got news for you. It's not going back to the way it was. I don't know what it's going to look like, but it's not going to look like before. Something has happened. And we have to decide what we're going to do. Are we going to embrace our defining moment, or are we going to pretend we're not in one? Because trust me, we are in one. I mean, think of it. When has there ever been a time like this where the whole world has ground to a halt, and the malls are closed, and the golf courses are closed, and the ski hills? I never went skiing this year. First time in 55 years I didn't go skiing. Not that I'm counting. But it's been incredible that everything that has distracted us has all of a sudden come to a halt. And here we are in our homes, sequestered away. Here we are quarantined in our homes, working from our homes with our families, which, by the way, maybe is a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing that fathers are at their home and they have no other distractions, and there's no golf courses open, and there's no other things for them to run off to, and no clubs to go to, and no restaurants to go to. And you know what? This is what God said. He said, in the last days, before the great and coming day of the Lord, he said, I will turn the hearts of the fathers towards the children, and the hearts of the children towards the fathers, lest I strike the earth with a curse. So maybe this is something really important for us. Maybe something is going on here more than meets the eye. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you the benefit of 33 years of ministry. And there's a few keys that I've learned that actually help us to overcome in times of trouble. Here's the keys to overcoming. Number 1 is attitude is everything. Number 2, action is essential. And number 3, amelioration is inevitable. Amelia, what? I know what some of you are thinking. Big word. I needed a word that started with A because I love alliteration. All amelioration means is betterment. It means that you will be better than you were before. And so if attitude is everything, if action is essential, then betterment or amelioration is inevitable. It will come we will change. So let's start with the first one. The first one is this, is that attitude is everything. It's a bit of a motto I live by. I just think it is so important for us to understand that no matter what happens in life, attitude is key. And you can get through almost everything if you have the right attitude. See, we're not defeated by circumstances. We're actually defeated by attitude. See, let me put it this way. If you're going to be an overcomer, what is the one requirement to being an overcomer? Well, it's adversity. You have to have something to overcome. And if there wasn't anything to overcome, you wouldn't be able to be an overcomer. And so during times of adversity, that's when people are made. That's when leaders are made. That's when good Christians are made. Jesus said, you will have tribulation in this world. It's a promise. I always joke about this. It's the one promise nobody ever puts up on their fridge. And you know, we just need to realize that adversity is part of life. You can't escape it. It's like the story of Susie. She was out playing in the backyard and she bumped her head on a tree limb. She came running in and she said, Mommy, Joey hit me on the head. And her mother said, Joey went out with your father. He's not even here. She says, you mean this kind of thing can happen anytime? And you know what? We just need to realize that stuff happens in life. I love the attitude of Paul. Paul the Apostle was one of these kind of even-Steven guys. It didn't seem to matter what was going on in his life, whether he's being beaten or imprisoned or stoned or any manner of things. He was kind of completely good with it, kind of chill with it. He says, I've learned in all things to be content. And, you know, he actually goes on further than that, and he says, you know, people will glory about this or glory about that. I'll glory in my infirmities because I am made strong in my weakness. You know, we invite speakers to come to the church and speak, and they write us back and they say, what is the hotel like that you're going to put me up in? I always laugh about that. Paul would have written the city he was going to and said, what's your jail like? Because that's probably where I'll end up. So one of the things I do is I go on mission trips to the developing world, the third world sometimes, and Kathy's never gone with me. My wife's never gone with me, and she just has always been sort of nervous about that sort of thing. And we had an unreached people group in Nepal that we had sponsored, and they finally got their scriptures translated into their language, and they really wanted me to come to Kathmandu, and they wanted me to come and preach to them and do a conference with translators and pastors. And so I agreed to do this. And so I decided I was going to try to talk Kathy into coming with me. And so finally I talked her into it. I said, you know, Nepal's a pretty nice country, and, you know, Mount Everest is there. It's beautiful. You'll have a great time. So anyway, I managed to convince her to come with me. And I should have known from the first couple of hours how this was going to go. And I'll just give you the short version of this story, and there's a lot of details to it. So we fly from Winnipeg to Chicago. And in Chicago, we were getting on a plane, and that plane was flying 16 hours, which is a long flight in anybody's books, from Chicago to Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. And so we're sitting on this plane on the tarmac for 2 hours. There's something wrong with the plane. So I'm thinking we have a 16-hour flight. We're sitting here in the sun with the air conditioner not running. The plane was like an oven. And I thought, we haven't even left yet, and I want to get off this stupid plane. Nevertheless, finally the plane took off. Kathy, I don't know how this always happens. She ended up with the middle seat. Don't know how that happens. I booked the ticket, so it's really sad that she got the middle seat. But anyway, she ended up having this man sitting beside her for 16 hours. A Middle Eastern man. I'm sure he's a lovely man, but he was very large, and he had, let's call him aromatic. And he was falling asleep right on Kathy like this. And of course, Kathy was leaning over my way, trying to get away. And the poor kid, she had to face this for 16 hours. So we end up in Abu Dhabi. And of course, our flight's leaving that very day. And we go from that flight, get on our other flight, 5 hours, we're in Kathmandu. Well, we were 2 hours late because we sat on the tarmac. Therefore, we missed our flight. And now we are spending the night in Abu Dhabi. So we spend the night in Abu Dhabi. We get a hotel. They gave us tickets, plane tickets. We come back to get on the plane the next morning. We got up early, like 5 in the morning, so we get our 7 a.m. flight to Kathmandu. We're standing in line. We're just about to get on the plane. I hand them our tickets. They said, we're sorry you're not on this flight. We said, what do you mean we're not on this flight? We have the tickets. We have our seat number assigned right here. They said, somebody else is in your seat. I said, what do you mean someone else is in our seat? I got the ticket and I got my seat number here. They said, no, sorry, sir, you were supposed to be on the flight last night. I said, yes, I know we were supposed to be on the flight last night, but we missed that flight, so we're on this flight. No, you're not. But we can put you on the next flight, which is going out tonight. So we ended up having to spend the day in Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi is one of the most interesting places on the earth. It was 52 degrees Celsius outside. And so even though it's a modern place, you can't go outside. 52 degrees above feels like 52 degrees below. It's uncomfortable. And so we spent most of the day sitting in the airport, 12 hours waiting for our next flight. So we get on our next flight, we fly 5 hours to Kathmandu, we arrive in the middle of the night, ready for this? We get there, and our luggage doesn't arrive. We said, where's our luggage? We eventually found out that our luggage had gone to India. And so it just went on like this, one thing after another, and I thought, oh, I don't know if Kathy's gonna love this thing. So we finally get to our room, and our room, I mean, I'm not even gonna tell you about the bathroom. It was the worst bathroom I've ever seen in my life. It looks like it was last cleaned, never. It looks like it had never been cleaned. But the bed was the thing that got me. I'm gonna show you a picture of it. Here's the picture of the bed. And it's hard to tell, but I'll tell you the dimensions of that bed. It was 3 feet wide and it was 5 feet long. And you can see the clothes hanging there, which are almost the same length as the bed. And it has no mattress. It was basically like sleeping on our kitchen table. It was that hard, it was that small. We slept on top of the comforter because at least there would be some cushion. And I don't know how two of us slept on a 5-foot-long bed that was 3 feet wide, but we managed to get through it. Now the reason they have beds that size is the Nepali people are like small, like, 4.5 feet. You can see this picture here of some of my buddies that were from there. And so they would have fit in a bed like that. Now, it turned out that we didn't really have much to complain about because they weren't sleeping on a bed at all. These poor guys were sleeping on the floor. And we asked them how their journey was and how long it was. And they said 3 days. And what that meant was they walked for 2 days and were on the bus for 1 day. And in Nepal, that's what they do. They walk, they trek through the hills. So I thought, I really have nothing to complain about. But nevertheless, I remember when Kathy looked at that bathroom, she said to me these words. She said, we're not going to talk about this. I said, talk about what? She said, any of this. If you mention any of this, I won't be able to handle it. The only way I'm going to get through this is maintain a good attitude. And the only way I can maintain a good attitude in this is if we don't talk about any of this. So we're there 10 days, never talked about any of it. Never talked about the bed, never talked about the food, never talked about the bathroom, never complained about any of those things. And then we finally were leaving. We had a great time. The people were lovely. I'm not saying it wasn't a great time, it was. But the conditions were difficult. And I'll never forget, we got on the plane, and the plane took off out of Kathmandu, and she reached over. She was in the middle seat again. Don't know how that happened. She reaches over, takes my hand, and she said, I made it. And then just then, not moments after she said, I made it, the captain came on the intercom and he said, I have an announcement to make. They had no fuel in Kathmandu, so we're going to be making a landing in India. and Kathy went, India? I'm going to India? I said, think of the bright side. Maybe we'll find our luggage. I'm telling you, people, attitude is everything. You can't change your circumstances, but you can change your perspective and you can change your attitude. I'm not a big fan of CNN News, but I'll tell you, I am so impressed with this Chris Cuomo. He's the brother, he has his own show on CNN. He's the brother of the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. And this poor guy has contracted COVID-19, and he is quarantined in his basement, and he's still doing his show from his basement. And he's exhibiting this incredible attitude. And I'll tell you something, that is how leaders are made. That is how Christians are made. That's how any of us actually become who we are during these defining moments, during these moments of pressure. It's when the whole world is crashing in around us. That's when who we are really comes out. It's the toothpaste test. When the pressure is on, what's on the inside comes out. So the first thing is this, is that attitude is everything. The second thing, and it flows right out of this, is that action is essential. See, it's not good enough just to keep a good attitude. Then you have to act on that attitude. Then you have to act in a way that is befitting of the attitude that's within you. You look into Scripture, you see it again and again. You see David up against Goliath. I mean, when we look at what happened, there they are in pitched battle against Goliath, and everybody is running for fear of Goliath, and they're full of fear, they're full of anxiety. And along comes little Bo Peep along with his sheep, little David, and he's full of confidence and he's full of bravado, and he's got this attitude. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that defies the armies of the living God? So there he had an attitude of faith and confidence, but it wasn't enough for him just to have the attitude. He had to act on it. Action is essential. And it says he got a sling and 5 smooth stones, and he ran towards Goliath. And see, that's what we do. In times of trouble, in times of adversity, we have to face our enemy head on. Joshua and Caleb did the same thing. I mean, it wasn't just attitude when they came back after spying out the land and they got this evil report from everybody else, and they stood up and they said, "Let us go up at once, for we are well able to overcome it." Their overcoming attitude had to be acted on, which eventually it did. Now, they couldn't go in then, but 40 years later, they went in and they took that land and they acted on the confidence that was in their heart. And that's how this works. We have to act on the confidence that is within us. I don't know about you, but whenever I'm on these news sites, they always have these sponsored links underneath on the internet. And you do need to know what a sponsored link is. A sponsored link means advertisement. But they're so tantalizing to me, I always want to click on them. Miracle cure the doctors don't want you to know about. Well, I want to know. And I know that if I click on it, I'm going to end up in some stupid advertisement, because it happened to me once. I've already fallen into this trap once. And I'll tell you what it is. I fell into it. It was 6-pack shortcuts. I thought, 6-pack abs? The shortcuts? Who wouldn't want 6-pack abs, right? If there was a shortcut. And so I thought, no, don't do it. Don't click on it. I clicked on it. Then I'm into Mike Chan's 6-pack shortcuts. Well, let me tell you, first of all, what a 6-pack shortcut is. It's exercise. That's what his shortcut is. If you exercise and do it all day long, every single day, that's the shortcut to 6-pack abs. That's not a shortcut. That's a long cut. And so that's my short introduction to how dangerous these sponsored links are. However, let me tell you about the one I saw this week. And there it was, greatest U.S. presidents of all time, sponsored link. I thought I shouldn't click on this, but I really got to know, who is the greatest president of all time? Was it Jimmy Carter? Is it Donald Trump? I got to know. And so anyway, I clicked on it. Turned out okay, actually. And it was a legitimate, something or other. And had lots of advertising in it. But the point was, here, I'm going to tell you who they are. The 3 greatest presidents of all times, according to the sponsored link, which is a good source. And here's who they were. It was fascinating to me. Number 1 was Abraham Lincoln. Number 2 was George Washington. And number 3 was Franklin D. Roosevelt. And here's what's interesting about those 3 men. All 3 of those men were wartime presidents. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was Civil War president. He actually had to deal with this whole Civil War, and then his whole point was try to emancipate the slaves and to end slavery. And he had more to deal with than probably any other president. And then we have George Washington. He was the commander-in-chief during the American Revolution. And then he became the founding father of this nation and had to deal with that through all the adversity of that. And the third, number 3, was Franklin D. Roosevelt. He actually was an unprecedented 3-time president who actually led the nation through the Depression and through the Second World War. I mean, and I look at all of these men, and I think it's incredible to me that what they did was they had to face off during the most difficult times in history. And you see, that is what makes us who we are. Having the right attitude and then having the right actions. And here's my point, is that the worst times make the best Christians. The best times make the worst Christians. Same for leaders, same for any kind of people. It is actually these defining moments, these challenging moments, these difficult times where we will be determined that we will do what we have to do no matter how much it hurts. Reminds me a little of the story of this guy who was in the hospital, and they were letting him out, they were releasing him, and the doctor wanted to talk to the wife and called her aside and said, I want to tell you this privately. And your husband's gone through quite an episode here, and the least amount of stress is going to kill him. And so this is what you're going to have to do for him. You're going to have to do everything for him. You're going to have to make all his meals. You're going to have to feed him. And you're going to have to treat him nice and never raise your voice at him. And you're going to have to bring him his slippers in the morning. And you're going to have to bring him the newspaper. And you're going to have to virtually take care of every need of his. And if you don't do that, he's going to die. So then she went back in the room to get her husband and said, we can go. And he said, well, I got to know what did the doctor say. She says, the doctor said, you're going to die. Thank God I can laugh at my own jokes. All right, so the first thing is this, is that attitude is everything. The second thing is that action is essential. And the last and final thing is that amelioration is inevitable. The betterment of us is inevitable if we will just get through these things. So Hebrews chapter 11 is what we call the Faith Hall of Fame. And it lists all these people that, were men and women of great faith. And on this list, there's people like Noah and Moses and Joseph and David. And every single one of them has one thing in common. They actually succeeded through great adversity. I mean, we look at Noah, he had to deal with the flood and the destruction of all mankind. We look at Moses, he had to take on, the Pharaoh and lead the children of Israel for 40 years out of Egypt and through the wilderness. And we look at Joseph, he was sold off as a slave and he had to deal with that. We look at David, he had to fight Goliath, he had to fight all these enemies and the Philistines, and the list goes on and on. Every single one of these people in the Faith Hall of Fame, they're there because they acted and became better people and greater people because they achieved in the moments of great struggle. But there's someone who's suspicious by his absence on this list. And you know who it is? It's Solomon. David's son Solomon is not on this list in the Faith Hall of Fame. And I'll tell you why he's not on that list. Because he actually was the king of Israel during a time when there was no war, there was no famine, there was no pestilence, they were wealthy, they were rich. And this is how he describes himself in his own writings. He said, whatever my eyes desired, I gave them. And anything my heart wanted, I did not withhold any pleasure from it. He was living the life that we live now in North America of excess and of abundance and not wanting any kind of hardship, and not wanting any kind of adversity, not wanting any kind of toil. And yes, he was the wisest man that ever lived, and he has a great story. It's a tremendous, amount of wisdom that he wrote on, but he failed miserably. Because what he did was he just buried himself in the excesses of the day, and he never proved who he was and his worth through adversity, like I've been talking about today. And as a result, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Or as my daughter always used to say, 300 porcupines. Who would want 300 porcupines? To which I would say, who would want 700 wives? And this is how the end of the story concludes for Solomon. It said, and when he was old, his many wives led his heart astray after other gods, and his heart wasn't loyal to the Lord, as was his father David. And my whole point in this is we can either be the David or the Solomon. We can want it all to be nice and all to be comfortable and all to be prosperous and all to be wonderful and every day to be happy. Or we can embrace the journey during times of adversity, and we can have the proper attitude, which is essential. We can have the proper actions, which is just as essential, and then we will become better people for it, because this is our defining moment. And how we respond during this time is going to determine what kind of people we are, what kind of Christians we are, and what kind of difference we make in this world. For we have come to the kingdom for such a time as this.